My name is Marissa Whitlock, and I was 39 years old the night my adoptive parents took me to dinner to abandon me. The restaurant was called the Lantern Room, one of those quiet places in Raleigh where the lights were low, the napkins were thick, and every table seemed designed for conversations people did not want overheard. My mother, Evelyn Whitlock, had chosen it herself. That should have warned me. Evelyn did not spend money on me unless there was a reason tucked inside it like a folded receipt. She sat across from me in a navy dress, her silver hair pinned so tightly it pulled at the corners of her face. My father, Calvin, sat beside her with both hands around his water glass, though he never drank from it. No one mentioned my birthday coming up. No one asked about work. No one smiled long enough for it to reach their eyes. Then Evelyn placed a cream-colored envelope on the table between us. "We have carried this longer than anyone could reasonably expect," she said. "Not raised me. Not loved me. Carried this." Calvin slid a stack of papers toward me. The title on the first page read, "Family Closure Agreement." I had seen documents like that before. Not with that exact name, but close enough. In hospital rooms, in waiting areas, in the hands of relatives who waited until someone was scared, tired, grieving, or alone before asking for a signature. My mother thought I was alone. She thought the envelope would end me quietly, cleanly, before my 40th birthday could change anything. She thought I would read those pages, hear whatever speech she had practiced, and shrink back into the grateful girl she had trained me to be. But at the next table, close enough to hear the ice shift in Calvin's glass, sat 4 people she had never bothered to look at. My birth family had arrived before the appetizer. To understand why I did not turn toward the next table right away, why I did not let the people sitting there save me before Evelyn even finished unfolding her performance, you have to understand the kind of child I had been trained to become. In the Whitlock house, gratitude was not a feeling. It was a rule. Evelyn never had to raise her voice to make that clear. She was too polished for shouting, too proud of the way she could make cruelty sound like instruction. If I asked for anything beyond what she had already decided I deserved, she would pause, look over her glasses, and say, "Marissa, not every child gets chosen. You should remember that. Chosen." That word followed me through childhood like a leash, dressed up as a compliment. I heard it when my sneakers started pinching before school began, and Evelyn said they could last another semester if I wore thinner socks. I heard it when I wanted to sleep over at a friend's house and she told me other families might not understand our situation. I heard it when I was 12 and wanted the same kind of winter coat the girls at school had, the one with the soft lining and real pockets. And Evelyn came home with a brown clearance rack coat 2 sizes too large. "You don't need fancy," she said, cutting off the tag with kitchen scissors. "You need warm." Calvin was usually nearby when she said things like that. He never corrected her. He had a special talent for becoming part of the room when courage was required. He would fold his newspaper, clear his throat, adjust his glasses, and look anywhere except at me. As a child, I mistook that silence for kindness because it did not sting the way Evelyn's voice did. It took me years to understand that silence can sign its name to harm just as clearly as speech can. Lorraine Pike understood my place before I did. She was Evelyn's niece, older than me, pretty in the effortless way of someone who had never wondered whether she belonged in the family photo. At cookouts, she would introduce me with a smile that looked sweet from across the yard. "This is Marissa," she would say. "Aunt Evelyn's little charity case." People laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because laughing made it easier not to object. So I learned to smile with them. That was the first skill the Whitlocks gave me. Not confidence, not safety, not the easy certainty that a child should have in her own home. I learned how to make humiliation look like manners. By the time Evelyn placed that cream-colored envelope on the restaurant table, she still believed I was that same girl, grateful for the wound because at least it came wrapped politely. Before the story begins, please subscribe to support the channel. Are you feeling a little down today? If so, type 1. If you're feeling peaceful today, type 2. Whatever your mood, I hope this story will be like a warm cup of tea, helping to soothe your heart a little. And now, let's begin. The first time I understood that gratitude could be turned into paperwork, I was 13 years old. It was the fall I started 8th grade, and for once, I had let myself hope for something ordinary, not a party. I had already learned not to ask for anything that required invitations, decorations, or anyone else's enthusiasm. I only wanted dinner that did not feel like an obligation and maybe a cake with my name spelled correctly. That was the size of my dream at 13. Small enough, I thought, to be safe. Evelyn bought a round grocery store cake from the discount shelf. The frosting had cracked along one side, and someone had scraped off a plastic decoration before she brought it home, leaving a pale square in the blue icing. She set it on the kitchen table after dinner, lit 2 skinny candles, because she said 13 candles were wasteful, and told me to make a wish quickly before wax got on the frosting. Lorraine was there that night, sitting near Evelyn, watching me with the lazy interest people give to a show they have already seen. Calvin took one photograph, but he did it from across the room, without asking anyone to move closer. In the picture, which I saw years later in a drawer, I am standing alone behind the cake, smiling like someone had taught me where to put my face. After I blew out the candles, Evelyn did not hand me a gift. She handed me a notebook. It was black, with a stiff cover, and a red ribbon marker. On the first page, in Evelyn's narrow handwriting, she had written, "Marissa's Gratitude Ledger." I remember the word ledger making my stomach tighten before I fully understood why. She had listed things in columns: winter shoes, dental cleaning, school supplies, choir uniform, birthday cake. Beside each item was a number, written to the cent. "This is not to make you feel bad," she said, which was how I knew it was exactly meant to do that. "It is to help you understand what it takes to raise a child who was given a second chance." Then she told me to write one sentence under the list. I can still see my pencil hovering over the page. "I am grateful the Whitlocks chose to raise me." Everyone watched until I wrote it. Later that night, Agnes Whitlock found me on the back porch, with the notebook closed in my lap. She did not ask to see it. She only sat beside me, smelling faintly of hand lotion and peppermint tea, and looked out at the dark yard. After a long while, she said, "One day, they may use paper to tell you where you don't belong." I turned toward her, confused. Agnes took my hand and squeezed it once. "When that day comes, don't listen to the loudest voice in the room, Marissa. Read the smallest print." I did not understand Agnes that night. At 13, I thought she was talking about report cards or permission slips, some ordinary adult warning wrapped in old woman mystery. I only knew her hand was warm, and for a few minutes on that porch, the notebook in my lap felt less like proof against me and more like something I might one day learn how to close. I left the Whitlock house 6 years later with 2 suitcases, a used Honda Civic that stalled whenever it rained, and a checking account thin enough to scare me if I looked at it too long. Evelyn called it dramatic. Calvin stood in the driveway with his hands in his pockets and said, "Call if you need anything," in the voice of a man hoping I would not. I told them I'd be fine because I had learned early that needing less made everyone more comfortable. For a long time, I confused survival with independence. I worked registration at an urgent care clinic during the day and took night classes under fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired and honest. Later, I transferred into a health administration program, then found my way into patient advocacy almost by accident. A woman in the billing office asked if I could sit with an elderly man whose son kept pushing him to sign a medical power of attorney he did not understand. I remember pulling a chair close to his bed, reading the form out loud, and watching his shoulders lower when he realized he was allowed to say no. That became my work. I sat with widows whose adult children suddenly became very interested in bank accounts. I helped stroke patients understand who could make decisions for them and who could not. I explained insurance denials, guardianship forms, consent papers, discharge plans. I learned the language families use when they are afraid, and the language they use when they are greedy. The two can sound almost identical if you are not paying attention. The dangerous papers were never handed over by people who looked dangerous. They arrived softly, calmly, usually after bad news. Someone would say, "This is just easier," or "We're only trying to help," or "Sign here so we can all move forward." And I would feel Agnes's voice somewhere under my ribs. Read the smallest print. At work, I was good at protecting people in moments when they were too exhausted to protect themselves. I could ask the questions nobody wanted asked. I could slow a room down. I could put my finger on one sentence in a 6-page document and make the whole family go quiet. But with Evelyn, I was slower, because a stranger's manipulation is easier to name than the version that raised you. About a year before that dinner, the Whitlock family began removing me in pieces. It did not happen all at once. That would have been too honest. Evelyn believed in polished exits, in doors closed so gently you were halfway outside before you heard the lock. First, I stopped receiving the small, practical texts that had always made me useful. No more requests to pick up prescriptions after work. No more reminders about Calvin's cardiology appointments. No more photos of confusing insurance letters with, "Can you explain this?" For the first time in years, they did not need me, and somehow that felt less like freedom than warning. Then Thanksgiving changed. Every year, Evelyn hosted at the house on Hawthorne Lane, the same brick house with white columns and a dining room nobody used unless people were being judged over cranberry sauce. Normally, she assigned dishes in October. I was always given something plain, rolls or green beans, something that could not draw praise. That year, the group chat stayed quiet until the week before Thanksgiving, when Lorraine posted a photo of place cards lined up on Evelyn's dining table. The caption said, "Real family, real roots, real gratitude." There were 12 cards in the photo. Mine was not one of them. I stared at the screen in the hospital break room with a paper cup of coffee cooling between my hands. I did not text. I did not ask whether I had been forgotten. By then, I knew the difference between an oversight and a message. An oversight comes with embarrassment when discovered. A message waits to see if you will beg. Calvin texted me 2 days later. "Your mother is trying to keep things simple this year. Please don't make it harder." That was all. No invitation. No explanation. Just the familiar little assignment. Absorb the injury quietly so everyone else could enjoy dinner. Around the same time, Spencer Pike became suddenly important. He was 23, restless, and calling himself an entrepreneur because he had leased a narrow downtown storefront and bought an espresso machine. Lorraine called it a legacy project, though nobody explained whose legacy it was supposed to be. Evelyn shared his posts. Calvin commented with thumbs-up emojis. People who had never asked about my work began discussing startup costs and family investment as if money naturally moved towards Spencer by gravity. Then Lorraine posted again. "Some things should stay with blood. Some doors should only open inward." I read that one twice. Not because I did not understand it, but because part of me still hoped adults would eventually grow tired of being cruel in code. They didn't. By Christmas, I was not accused or confronted. I was simply edited out. While the word blood appeared everywhere, someone knew I would see it. By January, I had stopped pretending the word blood was accidental. I did not confront Lorraine. I did not call Evelyn and ask why my name had disappeared from rooms I had once been expected to serve in. I simply began doing what I did for patients every day. I documented patterns, dates, screenshots, missing invitations, messages that sounded harmless until you placed them side by side and saw the shape underneath. The first physical sign came on a Wednesday afternoon after a 12-hour shift. I was walking out of the hospital with my badge still clipped to my sweater when Aubrey Sloan caught up to me near the parking deck. Aubrey worked 2 floors above me in discharge planning, and she had the kind of face that gave away nothing until she trusted you. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I remember the way she lowered her voice. Not dramatic, just careful. "Earlier that day," she said, An older man had come to the information desk asking whether patient advocacy kept referral lists for attorneys who handled family responsibility agreements or adult guardianship releases. The volunteer sent him toward legal aid resources because hospitals do not draft private family documents. Aubrey had overheard enough to feel uncomfortable. He had gray hair, wire-frame glasses, and a navy raincoat. Calvin. She did not say his name because she did not know it. I did not say it either. I only thanked her, walked to my car, and sat behind the wheel until the windshield fogged around the edges. 3 days later, I stopped by Hawthorne Lane after work because Calvin had supposedly forgotten his blood pressure medication refill. Evelyn let me in with the tight cheerfulness people use when they are surprised and annoyed to see you at the same time. While she went upstairs, I stood in the kitchen where I had once learned to be grateful for clearance rack coats and saw a yellow legal pad on the counter beside Calvin's reading glasses. The top sheet had 3 phrases written in block letters. Family closure agreement. Sign before transfer date. No discussion of trust terms. For a second, the whole room narrowed to those words. The refrigerator hummed. Rain tapped against the breakfast nook window. Somewhere upstairs, Evelyn opened and closed a drawer too loudly. Then she came back faster than she should have. Her eyes went to the counter before they went to me. She turned the legal pad over with one smooth hand and smiled. Work notes, she said. I looked at her hand resting on the paper. At the hospital, I had seen families hide things when they were ashamed. Evelyn did not look ashamed. She looked inconvenienced. I left Hawthorne Lane that night without asking about the legal pad. That restraint cost me more than I like to admit. There is a certain kind of anger that wants to become noise, just so it has somewhere to go. Mine sat behind my ribs all the way home, hot and useless, while rain blurred the streetlights into long yellow lines. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew 2 things with the kind of certainty you do not argue with. Evelyn and Calvin were planning something before my 40th birthday, and whatever it was, they were afraid of a transfer date. The next morning, I called Martin Kessler. He was an estate attorney in Durham, recommended by a retired social worker I trusted. His office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building above a bakery, and when I arrived 2 days later, the hallway smelled like coffee, printer toner, and cinnamon. I brought everything I had. Screenshots, dates, the photo I had taken in my mind of that legal pad, and the few old adoption papers Evelyn had kept in a file box under the hall closet when I was a teenager. Martin did not interrupt me once. When I finished, he leaned back, took off his glasses, and said, "This is not a family conversation. This is a deadline." 3 weeks later, he called me in. There are moments when a room looks ordinary and still divides your life into before and after. Martin's conference room had beige walls, 2 framed diplomas, and a bowl of peppermints near the door. Nothing dramatic, nothing that warned me the woman who walked in would not be the same woman who walked out. He slid the first document across the table, my original birth certificate. For 39 years, I had known myself as Marissa Elaine Whitlock. But there, in black type, was another name, Marissa Bell Marlowe. The name did not feel unfamiliar. It felt buried. Under Mother, the certificate listed Tessa Marlowe. Under Father, the space was blank, but attached to the hospital record was a handwritten note naming Raylan Brooks as the man Tessa had asked them to contact. No one ever had. Then Martin placed the second document beside it, the Whitlock Kinship Preservation Trust, created by Agnes Whitlock, amended 3 years before her death. Evelyn and Calvin had been receiving monthly caretaker distributions for decades. Those payments would end the month before my 40th birthday. The remainder, including the Hawthorne Lane house, would transfer to me. Martin tapped one paragraph with his pen. "They don't want closure," he said. "They want your signature before ownership changes." That night, I called Tessa Marlowe. She answered on the 4th ring. And when I said my name, she made a sound so small I almost apologized for existing. Then she whispered, "I kept a chair for you every birthday. I just never knew where to send the invitation." I did not sleep after that call. Tessa and I stayed on the phone for nearly 2 hours, most of it quiet. She told me she had been 19 when I was born, sick with a fever that turned into a hospital stay, surrounded by people who kept saying adoption was the merciful choice. She did not ask me to forgive her. That mattered. She did not try to explain away the hole in my life with one speech. She only answered what I asked, and stopped when my voice went thin. The next morning, I drove back to Martin Kessler's office, with my eyes swollen and my folder heavier than it had been the day before, even though nothing inside it had changed. I wanted to call Evelyn from the parking lot. I wanted to say Tessa's name into the phone and listen to what happened to my mother's breathing. I wanted, for once, to make someone else feel the floor move. Martin let me talk myself down. He listened, then turned the trust document toward me with 2 fingers. Marissa, if they are preparing a signature under pressure, do not interrupt them before they show you the paper. That sounds like letting them hurt me first, I said. No, he said. It means not rescuing them from their own evidence. That sentence settled the room. He explained it the way good lawyers explain painful things, plainly enough that you cannot hide inside confusion. If Evelyn and Calvin were planning to present a waiver disguised as closure, the cleanest thing I could do was let them present it. Let them choose the setting. Let them choose the words. Let them bring whoever they thought would pressure me. The more carefully they staged it, the more clearly their intent would show. So we prepared, not for revenge, but for record. Martin drafted a letter confirming he represented me in all matters related to the Whitlock Kinship Preservation Trust. He made certified copies of the trust pages showing the transfer language. He ordered a clean copy of my original birth certificate and attached the hospital note with Raylan Brooks's name. He also wrote a short memo explaining that any document signed under emotional pressure, especially after a concealed adoption disclosure, could be challenged. Then he handed me one more page. It was not legal language. It was a list of instructions. Do not sign anything. Do not argue facts they have not raised. Do not threaten. Let them speak. Keep your hands visible. Leave when you are ready. I read the list twice. For the first time in my life, someone had written instructions, not for how to be grateful, but for how to be free. I carried that page in my purse for weeks. Not because I needed to read it again, though sometimes I did, sitting in my car after work with the dome light on and my thumb pressed against the fold. I carried it because it was the first piece of paper in my life that did not ask me to owe someone. It did not measure me, price me, or remind me who had taken me in. It simply gave me permission to stand still while other people revealed themselves. During those weeks, Tessa became real slowly. First, she was a voice. Then she was a photograph, sent in a text message, standing in front of a pottery kiln with clay on her forearm and my chin on her face. Then she was a woman across from me, in a diner outside Asheville, nervous enough to stir untouched coffee for 20 minutes, before finally pushing a small wooden box toward me. Inside were hospital bracelets, a faded Polaroid, and a pink knit hat no bigger than my fist. I didn't keep you, she said, her voice breaking only once. But I kept what I could. Raylan Brooks came the second time. He looked like a man who had spent years repairing things with his hands, and still could not forgive himself for the one thing he had never been told was broken. He did not hug me until I stepped forward first. June, my younger half-sister, talked too fast because silence made her cry. Otis Bell, Tessa's father, watched me from beneath heavy white eyebrows and said, "Well, there she is." Like I had been late for supper, not missing for nearly 40 years. They never rushed me. That was what undid me most. No one demanded I call them family before the word fit in my mouth. Then Evelyn called. Her voice was warm enough to make my skin go cold. "Your father and I would like to take you to dinner," she said. "Somewhere nice. Before your birthday. We think it's time to close certain chapters like adults." I wrote the sentence down while she was still speaking. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at Martin's instructions. Do not sign anything. Let them speak. Leave when you are ready. Then, I called Tessa. I told her everything. The restaurant, the legal pad, the timing, the sentence Evelyn had used. I told her I did not want a scene. I did not want anyone to fight for me. I only wanted, for once, not to be alone. While people explained why I was easy to discard, Tessa did not hesitate. "What time?" she asked. Raylan got on the phone next and said, "We'll be there." June asked what she should wear, then started crying before I could answer. Otis took the phone last. "You don't need an army, Marissa," he said. "You need a table that won't empty when things get hard." So I made one more call. The Lantern Room had Evelyn's reservation for 3 near the front. Under my own name, I reserved the table beside it for 4 people and 1 empty chair. 2 days before the dinner, Martin called me at 7:18 inches the morning. I remember the time because I was standing in my bathroom with one earring in, trying to decide whether I had enough energy to wash my hair before a 9-hour shift. His name lit up my phone, and something in my chest went still. Lawyers do not call before business hours because they found nothing. "I need you to come by when you can," he said. I asked if something was wrong. He paused just long enough for the answer to become yes. By noon, I was sitting in his office with my coat still on. Martin did not begin with the trust this time. He did not begin with signatures or transfer dates. He opened a thin folder I had never seen before and placed a copy of a letter on the table between us. It was dated 21 years earlier, 6 weeks after I turned 18. The handwriting was careful and slanted, the kind people use when they are afraid emotion might make the words unreadable. At the top was the Hawthorne Lane address. Below it, a name, "Dear Marissa." I did not touch the page at first. Martin said the copy had been included in an old trustee correspondence file Agnes's bank had preserved. Tessa had sent the letter after locating the Whitlock address through a private intermediary. She had not asked for custody, she had not demanded a meeting. She had only written that she was my birth mother, that she understood if I wanted nothing from her, and that if I ever wanted answers, she would be ready. At the bottom, beneath her signature, was a postal receipt. Delivered. Signed for by E. Whitlock. For several seconds, the room made no sound. Or maybe it did, and I simply stopped receiving it. I thought about 18-year-old me packing 2 suitcases in a bedroom that had never felt fully mine. I thought about the driveway, Calvin's hands in his pockets, Evelyn calling me dramatic. I thought about all the nights after that, when I had sat in cheap apartments and told myself no one was looking for me, because that was easier than wondering why no one had come. But someone had. Tessa had reached for me. Evelyn had taken the letter and closed her hand around the reach. Martin's voice was gentle when he said, "This changes the character of what they hid." I nodded because speaking felt too large. Until that morning, I had believed Evelyn kept me because I was useful. That was ugly enough. But this was different. This meant she had known there was another door. She had known someone was standing on the other side of it with my name in her mouth, and she had locked it anyway. By the time I walked into the Lantern Room 2 nights later, the letter with Evelyn's signature was folded inside my purse beside Martin's instructions. I did not look toward the table beside ours when the hostess led me in. I heard a chair shift. I caught the faint scent of clay dust and cedar, something that had started to mean Tessa to me, but I kept my eyes on Evelyn. If she wanted a stage, I was going to let her believe she controlled the lighting. Evelyn stood to kiss my cheek without touching it. Calvin gave me a small nod, the kind men give in elevators. The cream-colored envelope was already beside her water glass. That told me everything. She had arrived early enough to place it there like a centerpiece. For the first 10 minutes, they performed dinner. Evelyn asked about work in a voice too pleasant to be curious. Calvin mentioned traffic. Nobody ordered appetizers because nobody intended to stay long enough to enjoy them. Then, just as the waiter walked away with our entree orders, Evelyn folded her hands and began. "Marissa, your father and I have done a great deal of thinking." I looked at Calvin. He looked at the bread plate. "We believe," she continued, "that it is time for all of us to acknowledge reality. You are nearly 40. You have your own life. We have fulfilled our responsibilities, and there is no kindness in pretending this arrangement is something it was never meant to be. Arrangement. That was the word she chose for my childhood. Calvin pushed the papers toward me. "It's not meant to hurt you," he said quietly. It just gives everyone clarity. Before I could answer, Lorraine appeared at the edge of the table with Spencer behind her, both wearing the surprised faces of people who had been waiting for a signal. Lorraine pulled out a chair without being invited. "We're only here because this affects the whole family," she said. Spencer did not look embarrassed. He looked hungry. Evelyn opened the envelope and turned the top page toward me. "This is a family closure agreement. It states that you understand the adoption relationship has no continuing financial or legal expectation attached to it." I read the first paragraph, then the second. There it was, buried under soft words. Waiver, release, interest, trust, property, future claim. My hand stayed still. Lorraine leaned in. "The Hawthorne house should stay with actual Whitlocks, Marissa. Spencer has plans. Good plans." Calvin closed his eyes for half a second. I took my folder from my purse and placed it on the table. Then I looked at him, not Evelyn. "Dad," I said, "do you want me to sign this as the daughter you raised, or as the legal beneficiary of the trust you tried not to mention?" The table went so quiet, I could hear someone at the next table set down a fork. The silence at that table was not empty. It was crowded with every word Evelyn had rehearsed and suddenly could not use. She looked first at Calvin, then at Lorraine, then at the folder under my hand. "I don't know what you think you've found," she said, but her voice had lost its polish around the edges. I opened the folder slowly, the way Martin had told me to. No drama, no slammed papers, just one page after another, laid flat on the white tablecloth. The representation letter first, the trust pages second, my original birth certificate third, and last, Tessa's letter, with Evelyn's signature on the delivery receipt. Calvin's face changed when he saw the trust. Evelyn's changed when she saw the letter. That told me which secret each of them had been carrying. "You received this when I was 18, I said. "She wrote to me. You signed for it." Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed. For once, she did not have a sentence ready. Lorraine recovered faster. "This is private family business," she snapped, glancing toward the room. "No," I said. "Private is what you call something before witnesses arrive." Only then did I turn toward the next table. Tessa was already standing. Raylan stood beside her, one hand resting on the back of his chair. June had both palms pressed to her mouth, trying not to cry. Otis looked at Evelyn with the steady disappointment of a man too old to be surprised by cruelty, but still unwilling to excuse it. Evelyn followed my gaze. For a second, she did not understand. Then she saw Tessa's face, saw my chin on another woman, saw the empty chair waiting between them, and the truth moved through her like cold water. "They're with you?" she whispered. I stood, holding my folder against my chest. "No," I said. "I'm with them." No one at the next table applauded. No one shouted. That would have made it smaller. June simply pulled out the empty chair. Tessa touched the back of it and said, "This one has been yours for a long time." I left a copy of the trust pages beside Evelyn's untouched envelope. "From now on," I said, "anything you need to say to me goes through my attorney." Then I walked the few steps between the tables. It was not far, maybe 6 feet, but it felt like crossing out of a life where love had always come with an invoice, and into one where a place had been set before I proved I deserved it. I sat down beside Tessa. Raylan poured me water with hands that shook. Otis pushed the bread basket toward me, like feeding me was the most natural thing in the world. Behind me, Evelyn said my name once. I did not turn around. For the first time, I let someone else keep the chair. What I learned that night is that family is not proven by the name written on your paperwork, or by the people who claim you when it benefits them. Family is proven in the quiet moments when there is nothing to gain. It is the person who saves you a chair before they know whether you will ever come home. It is the hand that reaches for yours without asking what you can give back. It is the voice that does not demand gratitude before offering love. For years, I thought being easy to keep was the same as being loved. I thought if I needed less, asked for less, and made myself useful enough, I could earn a permanent place in the room. But love that has to be earned over and over is not love. It is employment with better lighting. Real love does not keep a ledger. It does not turn birthdays into debts, or kindness into leverage. Real love makes room. And sometimes, healing does not look like screaming, winning, or making everyone regret what they did. Sometimes, healing is quieter than that. Sometimes it is standing up from the wrong table, walking 6 feet across a restaurant, and sitting down where your name does not have to be defended. We cannot always recover the years people took from us. We cannot rewrite the childhoods where we were made to feel temporary. But we can decide when the audition ends. We can stop begging cold people to become warm. We can stop shrinking ourselves to fit into places that were never built to hold us. If this story touched something in you, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from a table where you were only valued for what you provided? Or have you found people who loved you without making you prove your worth? Leave your thoughts below. Someone reading may need your words tonight. And if you believe stories like this matter, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to remember this. You do not have to earn a seat in the life of someone who truly loves you.